I came home early to surprise my wife, but found strange cars, balloons, a banner saying, "Welcome our little miracle," and my wife, 6 months pregnant, without me knowing. Pink and blue balloons were tied to our mailbox, bobbing in the October wind, like everything was normal, like there was nothing strange about my own house, looking as if it had been prepared for a celebration I had not been invited to. 6 cars I did not recognize were parked along both sides of Whitmore Drive, bumper to bumper, the way cars only line a quiet residential street when one particular house has become the destination. And across our front porch, stretched wide enough to be read from the end of the block, was a hand-painted banner that said, "Welcome our little miracle." I sat in my rental car at the end of the street and stared at it for a long time. My name is Miles Carver. I am 39 years old. I work as a pharmaceutical sales manager for a regional company based out of Columbus, Ohio, which means I spend roughly 3 weeks out of every month on the road. I drive between clinics. I schedule dinner meetings with physicians. I live out of a rolling suitcase. I sleep in hotels that all begin to look the same after a while, with the same neutral walls, the same stiff pillows, the same bad coffee in the lobby. It is not glamorous work. It pays well, and for years I told myself that was the point. It kept the mortgage current on the house at the end of Whitmore Drive, the house with the balloons tied to the mailbox. I had been in Pittsburgh for 4 days. The meeting that was supposed to run through Friday was canceled on Thursday morning, when the medical director rescheduled without warning. That happens in my business. Doctors cancel things. You adapt. So instead of spending another night eating bad pasta in a hotel bar and watching cable news, I booked an early flight home. I did not text Camille because I wanted to surprise her. I landed in Columbus by 2 in the afternoon, then stopped at her favorite bakery on 5th Street and bought a lemon tart. I still remember smiling at the woman behind the counter as she tied the ribbon around the box. I remember thinking Camille would love it. Camille, my wife of 7 years. The woman I met at a charity fundraiser when I was 31 and she was 28. She had laughed at something I said from across a crowded room, and somehow that laugh turned my entire evening into something worth remembering. We were married on a Saturday in June in a small ceremony outside Granville, Ohio, with family and a few close friends. It was the kind of wedding neither of us had to financially recover from afterward. It was simple. It was warm. It felt like us. 7 years of marriage, and there I was, sitting at the end of our street with a lemon tart on the passenger seat, staring at a banner welcoming a baby I did not know existed. Before I tell you what happened when I walked through that door, you need to understand the shape of our marriage, because what I found inside that house did not happen overnight, and what I did in the hours and days that followed was not impulsive. It came from everything that had been building long before that October afternoon. Camille and I had tried to have children. That was the part that made the banner feel as if it had been written in a foreign language. We had tried for 2 years, starting in the 3rd year of our marriage. There were appointments, there were medications, there were conversations with specialists whose offices carried that strange clinical hopefulness that somehow made everything feel worse instead of better. There were 2 pregnancies. Neither one lasted past 10 weeks. After the second loss, Camille went quiet in a way I had never seen before. Not sad exactly. Quiet. Like she had gone somewhere deep inside herself and locked the door from the inside. We went to counseling with Dr. Farrell, a soft-spoken woman in her 50s with an office near the Short North neighborhood in Columbus. She helped us. She genuinely did. But she also said something during one of those sessions that I have thought about every single day since. She said, "Grief doesn't always look like crying. Sometimes it looks like distance. And sometimes distance, if it goes unaddressed, becomes permanent." I remembered those words the day Camille told me she wanted to stop trying. It was a Sunday. I was home, which was rare, and we were eating breakfast at the kitchen table. She set down her coffee cup and said it quietly, the way a person says something they have rehearsed so many times that it has lost its edge. "I think I need to stop trying, Miles. I think I need to just let it go." And I said okay because I thought I understood what she needed. I said okay because I loved her and because I did not want to make her pain heavier by turning it into a debate. I said okay because I was leaving for Detroit the next morning, and the week after that I would be in Cincinnati. And somewhere in my mind, I filed the conversation under something we would talk about more when I got back. But by the time I got back, we had moved on. Or at least we acted like we had. Couples do that sometimes. They move on from things they have not actually resolved. They do not heal around them. They just learn how to walk around them. Camille and I became very good at walking around things. That conversation happened 14 months before I sat at the end of Whitmore Drive reading that banner. Camille was a marketing consultant. She worked from home 3 days a week and drove into her firm's Clintonville office the other 2. It was a good arrangement for her. It gave her structure, but also flexibility. It gave her colleagues friendships and a professional identity outside of being my wife. That mattered to her, and I respected it, even if I sometimes worried that I did not know her professional life as well as I should. When you are on the road as much as I am, you miss things. Not always the big things at first. You miss the small ones. The way a person's mood shifts over the course of a week. The names of new friends. The details of office politics. The way the house feels on a Tuesday night when you are not there. You tell yourself you will catch up on the details when you get home. I had been telling myself that for years. I sat in that rental car for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the dashboard. I do not know why I was timing myself, except that my whole body had gone very still, and some part of me believed that if I moved too quickly, I might do something I could not undo. There were 6 cars. I recognized one of them, a silver Subaru that belonged to Camille's college friend Dana Whitfield, who lived in Bexley and came around for birthdays and the occasional Sunday brunch. The other 5 were strangers to me. The balloons were pink and blue, both colors, so it did not look like a gender reveal. It looked like something else. Welcome our little miracle. I picked up my phone. I almost called Camille. My thumb hovered over her name in my contacts, over the photo I had taken of her, laughing on the deck of a rented lake house in Put-in Bay 3 summers earlier, before any of this, before whatever this was. Then I put the phone down. I left the lemon tart on the passenger seat and got out of the car. The porch steps creaked under me the way they always did. I had been meaning to fix that second step for 2 years. I heard voices before I reached the door. Women's voices. A burst of laughter. The clink of glasses. Someone had music playing softly inside. The kind of music people put on when a group of women gather for an afternoon that is supposed to feel warm and intentional. I did not knock. I used my key. The foyer opened into the living room, and the living room had been transformed. White streamers ran along the ceiling. A table was stacked with wrapped gifts. Pink and blue tissue paper spilled out of gift bags. And in the center of it all, sitting in the armchair we had bought together at a shop in German Village, the armchair we always said was too big for the room, but neither of us ever wanted to return, was Camille. She was unmistakably, visibly, approximately 6 months pregnant. The room went silent the moment they saw me standing in the doorway. Camille's face did something I had never seen it do in 7 years of marriage. Her expression passed through at least 4 different things in less than 2 seconds. Shock. Then something that looked briefly like relief. Then fear. Then a careful, deliberate blankness that she settled into like armor. She said my name. Miles. Just my name, nothing else. Dana was the first person to speak. She stood up from the couch with the kind of nervous energy that tells you someone knows more than they are letting on. Miles, hi, we were just… Camille didn't tell us you were… She didn't know I was coming, I said. The other women in the room, 4 of them, names I either did not know or could not access in that moment, stayed very still. People go still like that when they sense something structural has shifted and they do not yet know which direction everything is about to fall. Can you give us a minute? I asked. My voice was steady. I was surprised by how steady it sounded. The women moved quickly. I will give them credit for that. They read the room. Within 60 seconds, they had gathered their purses and jackets and filed out through the back door. Dana squeezed Camille's shoulder as she passed, but did not look at me. Then it was just us. Camille in the armchair, me in the doorway. Our house arranged around us like a stage set. I looked at her. I looked at the obvious curve of her stomach, at the way her hands were folded over it, the way pregnant women sometimes do, without thinking, like an instinct that forms before it is even fully conscious. How far along? I asked. She looked at me for a long moment. 24 weeks, she said quietly. 6 months. I had been home 8 days earlier. I had sat at the same kitchen table with a cup of coffee and talked to her about a difficult client in Pittsburgh. She had nodded. She had asked follow-up questions. And I had not once in that entire conversation, not once during that visit, noticed. "I'm trying to understand," I said. My voice cracked slightly on the last word, and I had not expected that. "I'm trying to understand how you are 24 weeks pregnant, and I am standing here learning that for the first time." She closed her eyes. "Miles, who knows?" She opened them. "What? Who knows? Your mother, Dana?" "People at work." There was a pause, and that pause told me everything before she spoke. "Some people. Some people. Miles, please sit down. Let me explain." I did not sit down. I stayed in the doorway because something in me understood that if I crossed the floor and sat down, I would be entering a different kind of conversation. The kind where you negotiate. The kind where you absorb. The kind where you let the other person reframe what happened before you have even had the chance to feel it clearly. I was not ready for that conversation yet. Is the baby mine? The question came out flat. I had not planned to ask it, but it was there between us before I could stop it. And once it was out, I could not pretend it had not been the loudest question in the room from the moment I saw the banner. Camille looked at me with an expression I still cannot fully describe. It was not offense. It was not even hurt. It was more like exhaustion. Like she had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had finally set it down. And the act of setting it down was almost more overwhelming than carrying it had been. "Yes," she said. "The baby is yours, Miles. Of course the baby is yours." She talked for 45 minutes. I stood in the doorway for the first 10, and then, at some point, I do not remember clearly, I moved to the couch and sat down. Not because I had decided to, it was more like my legs made a decision my mind had not approved yet. She had found out she was pregnant in April. That was the first thing she told me. April. Which meant she had been carrying this since before the spring fully turned. Since before my long stretch of back-to-back travel in May and June. Since before the weekend we spent at her sister Brianna's place in Worthington. Since before a dozen ordinary moments that I was now retroactively re-examining for things I had missed. She found out in April, and she had not told me. She said I was afraid. She said, "I didn't know how to tell you. After everything we went through before, after the losses, I needed to be sure this one was going to stay before I told you." And then the weeks kept going, and I kept telling myself, "Next week, when you're home. Next week." And then it became this thing I was carrying alone. And the longer I carried it alone, the harder it got to say out loud. She said, "I know that isn't fair to you. I know it isn't." She was crying by the time she reached the part about the baby shower. She had organized it with Dana. A small thing, she said, just close friends. Just a quiet acknowledgement that this was real and that it was happening. She had not told me about it because she had been planning to call me in Pittsburgh and say, "Come home early, I have something to tell you." But she had been putting that call off, the same way she had been putting off everything else. Then the guest list was confirmed. And by yesterday, it was too late to turn it into something that made logical sense. I listened to all of it. I am not a man who is good at big emotional moments. I have known that about myself for a long time. I process slowly. I get quiet when I should probably speak, and sometimes I speak when I should probably stay quiet. It was one of the things Camille used to say about me in the early years of our marriage. She said it gently, the way you point out a flaw in someone you love because you want things to work, not because you want to wound them. "Miles, you go somewhere inside yourself, and I lose you." I sat on that couch in our rearranged living room, surrounded by baby shower decorations I had not known were coming, and I went somewhere inside myself. I tried to understand the difference between a lie and a silence, because that was what I kept returning to. She had not lied to me. In months of phone calls and visits and ordinary conversations, she had not once said, "I am not pregnant." She had simply never said the other thing. She had allowed the space between us to swallow it whole. And the space between us, That was the part I could not stop thinking about. 3 weeks out of every month, I am not home. 3 weeks out of every month, Camille lives in that house on Whitmore Drive by herself. She works, she sees friends, she builds a life that moves forward without me in it, the way all lives do when the person who is supposed to be there simply is not. We talk on the phone, we text, we perform the technological approximation of intimacy that couples in my situation convince ourselves is enough. But it is not enough. I knew that. I had known it for years and filed it away the way I filed everything else away, under the idea that we would deal with it when I was home more. Sitting on that couch, I understood for the first time that home more might never come. And Camille, somewhere in the long, quiet months of a pregnancy she was carrying alone, may have understood that before I did. I stayed in the house that night. I want to be clear about that because in the days that followed, certain people began building a different story. Camille's mother, her sister Brianna, a few of Dana's well-meaning texts. They seemed to construct a version of events in which I had stormed out, abandoned a pregnant woman, and put myself before my family. That is not what happened. What happened is that after Camille finished talking, I sat in silence for a while. Then I asked her one question. "Are you happy about this baby?" She looked at me. Her hands were still resting on her stomach. "I'm terrified," she said. "And yes, I'm happy." I nodded. "Okay," I said. And that was enough for that night. I slept in our bed. She slept in our bed. We lay parallel in the dark, and neither of us reached for the other. But neither of us moved to the opposite side of the house either. That felt like something. It felt like the marriage choosing to stay in the room, even when the people inside it were not sure what to do next. In the morning, I called my manager Denise and told her I needed to request a leave modification. 2 weeks minimum, possibly more. I had unused PTO built up from 2 years of canceling vacations for client meetings. Denise was accommodating. She always was. She was the kind of manager who reminded you that the company's flexibility was a benefit, not a favor, and she meant it. Then I called my brother Owen. Owen lives in Akron. He has 2 daughters and a marriage that has always seemed steadier than mine in ways I quietly envied. Owen is 44. He does not panic. He is the person I call when I need someone to talk me out of doing something drastic or talk me into doing something necessary. "She kept a pregnancy from you for 6 months, Owen said after I explained everything. It was not a question, it was just a restatement. Almost like he wanted me to hear how it sounded out loud. "Yeah," I said. "Are you angry?" I thought about that. "I don't know yet," I said. "I think I'm more scared than angry." "Scared of what?" "Scared that the reason she didn't tell me," I said slowly, "is that she's not sure we're going to make it. Scared that this baby is something she needed without me in it. Scared that she's been building a life in that house that doesn't include me in the way I assumed it did." Owen was quiet for a moment. "Have you asked her that?" "Not yet." "Miles, that's the conversation you need to have." He was right. He is almost always right. It is one of his most irritating qualities. Camille and I talked for 3 days. Not the careful, surface-level kind of conversation 2 people have when they are trying to avoid conflict. We had the real kind. The kind where you say things you have been rehearsing inside your head for years without realizing you were rehearsing them. The kind Dr. Farrell had probably been waiting for us to have since she first saw us in her office 4 years earlier. Camille told me she had felt alone for most of our marriage. Not unloved, alone. She said there was a difference between those 2 things, and she had spent years trying to explain that difference to me, in small ways I did not catch, because I was always halfway to somewhere else. Then, eventually, she stopped trying to explain it. She simply began adjusting her life around the absence of me in it. She said, "When I found out I was pregnant, my first feeling, and I'm ashamed of this, was relief that I would have someone, that I wouldn't be so alone in that house. That landed harder than anything else. Harder than the banner. Harder than the baby shower. Harder than 6 months of silence. Because what she was describing was not simply a betrayal of me. It was the consequence of something I had helped build. A life that had made my wife feel so fundamentally alone that the prospect of a baby felt like company. I told her things I had not said out loud before. I told her I had known for years that my travel schedule was damaging us, and I had kept telling myself it was temporary. I had told myself the next promotion would mean less road time. I had told myself things would balance out. I had told myself we were making sacrifices now for a better future later. But the better future kept moving farther away, and the present kept becoming our actual life. I told her I had used work as a kind of insulation from the harder work of being fully present in a marriage. I told her losing those 2 pregnancies had broken something in me that I had never fully acknowledged. And instead of grieving beside her, I had gone back on the road 2 weeks after the second loss because a client in Cleveland needed me, and Camille had not asked me not to go. She looked at me when I said that. "I didn't ask you not to go because I thought you needed to," she said. "I needed you to ask me," I said. "I know that isn't fair, but I needed permission to stay." We were sitting at the kitchen table when we had that conversation. The lemon tart from the bakery on 5th Street was still on the counter, still in its box, still tied with the ribbon. I had forgotten to put it in the refrigerator, and it was probably no longer good, but neither of us had moved it. By then, it had become something else, a small artifact of the version of that afternoon I had imagined before I turned onto Whitmore Drive. We started marriage counseling the following week, not with Dr. Farrell. I think we both needed someone new, someone without 4 years of our previous history sitting in their notes. We found a therapist named Dr. Aaron Briggs, who worked out of a practice in Grandview Heights. He was straightforward, unhurried, and within 15 minutes of our first session, he identified something with a precision that felt almost surgical. He said, "Miles, Camille, what I'm hearing is that you have each developed a very high tolerance for managing things alone. You have both learned how to handle difficulty in solitude, and you have both mistaken that for resilience. But what it has actually done is train you not to need each other. And a marriage cannot survive not being needed." I thought about that on the drive home. I thought about my father, who worked construction his whole life, and in my memory, never once asked anyone for help with anything. He managed every hardship with a tight jaw and a longer work week. I had always understood that as strength. Dr. Briggs was telling me it was just another kind of distance. The baby was a boy, Camille told me on the 4th night. Not with ceremony, not with some grand reveal. Just quietly after dinner, the way you tell someone something you have been saving because you are not sure where to place it. She handed me the ultrasound image, the one she had been keeping in the drawer of her nightstand. I held it under the kitchen light and looked at the grainy gray shape of a person I had not yet met. I am not someone who cries easily. I can count on one hand the number of times I have cried as an adult. But I stood there in my kitchen, holding that image, and something inside me came loose. Some tightly held thing that had been in place since the second miscarriage, since the drive home from the specialist's office on a Tuesday in February 4 years earlier, when Camille stared out the passenger window the whole way, and I stared straight ahead at the road, and neither of us said a word. That thing finally came undone. I set the ultrasound down on the counter, put my face in my hands, and cried in a way I had not cried since I was young enough not to be embarrassed by it. Camille came and stood beside me. She put her arm around my shoulders and did not say anything. That was the moment the marriage decided something. I do not know how else to describe it. Some marriages have a moment like that, a hinge point, a place where both people feel the full weight of what they have almost lost, and that weight becomes something they choose to carry together instead of separately. We had that moment in our kitchen, over an ultrasound image and a ruined lemon tart. I called Denise the following Monday and told her I was resigning from the field position. She was quiet for a moment. "Miles, that's a significant decision. Have you thought about?" "For years," I said. "I've thought about it for years." There was a lateral move available inside the company, a regional training coordinator role, office-based, Columbus, predictable hours. I had been offered it 18 months earlier and turned it down because the pay cut was 8%, and I had told myself Camille and I were comfortable, and the timing was not right. The timing was never going to be right. I understand that now. Timing is a story you tell yourself while your actual life is happening somewhere else. The training coordinator role was still open. I took it. Owen called me that same evening, somehow already knowing. Our mother had texted him. "So you're staying home," he said. "I'm staying home. How does that feel?" I looked out the kitchen window at the backyard at the maple tree that dropped half its leaves directly onto the deck every October, the one I had been meaning to trim for 3 years. I thought about the second porch step that still creaked. I thought about all the small things that accumulate in a house when the person who is supposed to maintain them is always somewhere else. "It feels like something I should have done a long time ago," I said. "But it also feels like exactly the right time." There is a particular kind of grief that comes with realizing you have been the author of your own loss. It does not announce itself cleanly. It arrives slowly through small recognitions. A moment at the dinner table when you understand that the silence you mistook for comfortable companionship was actually two people who had stopped reaching for each other. A night driving home from a client meeting when you realize you are relieved the trip ran long because home requires something from you that the road does not. That grief is different from the grief of losing something outside your control. In some ways, it is heavier because it carries the weight of every place where the story could have changed, every moment where you could have stayed, every conversation you could have had, every time you noticed distance and chose to call it temporary because temporary made it easier to ignore. I spent a lot of the weeks after that October afternoon sitting with that grief, not wallowing in it. Dr. Briggs was very clear about the difference, but not running from it either, letting it show me what it needed to show me. And what it showed me was this. Camille had not broken our marriage. Neither had I, not exactly. We had both been so afraid of loss, of need, of the kind of vulnerability that comes with fully depending on another person, that we had kept leaving each other in the most ordinary ways, over and over, until the leaving had become the relationship. The banner was not the betrayal. The banner was a woman who had learned to celebrate alone, because the person who was supposed to celebrate with her was always somewhere between Columbus and Cleveland, carrying a rolling suitcase and chasing a quarterly sales target. Understanding that did not make everything simple, but it made everything true. Our son was born on a Tuesday in January, 7 pounds and 4 ounces in the labor and delivery ward at Ohio Health Riverside Methodist Hospital. Camille's sister Brianna was in the waiting room. Owen had driven down from Akron with his wife Tamra. I was in the room. I was there for all of it. When the nurse placed him in my arms for the first time, this small, furious, extraordinary person who smelled like something I had no word for. I looked across the room at Camille. She was exhausted and magnificent. And I thought about the lemon tart. I thought about the banner. I thought about those 11 minutes sitting at the end of Whitmore Drive, while my whole life rearranged itself 30 yards ahead of me. We named him Elliot. Elliot James Carver. We are not a perfect family. We are a family that came very close to being two people living in the same house, each privately certain the other one was managing fine. We are a family that required a moment of total, startling rupture to understand what we actually needed from each other. But we are a family. The second porch step still creaks. I fixed the first one last week. I will get to the second one. I am not going anywhere. I used to think presence and provision were almost the same thing. I thought I was a good husband because I kept the mortgage current and the bank account full. I thought the road was proof that I was taking care of my family. I did not realize that while I was busy selling to doctors, I was losing my seat at the table of my own life. That banner on the porch was not just a shock. It was a symptom. Camille did not hide the pregnancy from me because she was cruel. She hid it because, somewhere along the way, she had unlearned how to need me. And that is a devastating thing to understand about your own marriage. When the woman you love begins celebrating a miracle without you in the room, it means you have been missing from that room for a long time. The lesson I carried from all of it is simple, but it took almost losing everything for me to understand it. Success is worthless if you are not there to witness the life it was supposed to support. Being a provider is not the same as being a partner. A full bank account does not hold someone at night. A paid mortgage does not listen. A promotion does not replace presence. I did not just come home to a baby I had not known about. I came home to the truth that I had become a stranger in my own house. It took a total rupture for me to see the difference between funding a life and actually living inside it. I did not save my marriage by one dramatic gesture, or one apology, or one decision. I saved it by finally deciding to move back into it.